Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We're looking at Imam Ghazali's discussion on the nature and the essence of guidance. And in the last session, we looked at two aspects of reason. Necessity of reason, so necessary reason and sufficient reason. And what we said was that it's obligatory on a Muslim to recognize the necessity of reason in all aspects of his life and his religion and his thinking. So we accept the necessity of reason, but we don't think reason is self-sufficient. So, for example, reason is not self-sufficient in many ways. Reason is not self-sufficient in the sense that it can't do the work of other faculties. For example, it can't do what senses do, for example. It is not self-sufficient in the sense that on its own, it cannot recognize truth. It has to seek help from senses, seek help from other aspects of consciousness and mind and other faculties. And reason is not self-sufficient, especially in metaphysical affairs, so for various reasons. So when we say reason is necessary, we mean at least three things. Okay, so I want to note those three things, and then we'll get back to the text. So reason is necessary. The first sense in which reason is necessary is that without reason, we humans can't understand anything. So we always need reason to understand things, even in areas where reason on its own cannot provide us the full picture. So even in areas where reason is not sufficient, we need reason for understanding things. Later I'll give an example which will make it more clear what I mean by that. That's the first thing, reason. So, for example, reason cannot give us certain knowledge which we get only through revelation, through the glorious Quran, or through the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their sayings and their act. So there are certain things which revelation tells us which reason on its own cannot give us. For example, reason cannot tell us on its own that we should fast the month of Ramadan, for example, and it is obligatory on us. There's no way to know without, if the Prophet hadn't come to us and Gabriel hadn't come to him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hadn't revealed to him that we should fast the month of Ramadan, we would have not known that. And people might have fasted, but that would be just something which people do as a convention, but it can't have that divine sanction which Ramadan has, and divine obligation which Ramadan has. But the obligation, to understand the obligation of Ramadan, which reason cannot tell us that it is an obligation, we still need reason for understanding that it is an obligation once the revelation tells us, because revelation tells us whatever it tells us in human language, and whenever it comes to human language, reason is necessary for understanding things. Okay, so that's the first sense in which reason is necessary. Now, the second sense in which reason is necessary that it is through reason itself that is through reflection on the nature of reason. So reason reflect on itself, reflection on its own nature, which we call self-reflection. Yeah. So reason has this power of self-reflection. It doesn't reflect on other things only, but it also has an ability to reflect on its own nature. So it is through this self-reflection that reason analyzes its capacity. Reason analyzes its capacity and its incapacities, what it can do and what. So without this self-reflection of reason, we wouldn't have known that reason is not self-sufficient. So the first thing was that reason was absolutely necessary for any sort of understanding in the first place, even understanding those things which come through other faculties or other means, so understanding. And the second thing is that in order to realize the limits of reason, we know only through reason. So the knowledge that reason is not self-sufficient and that it is only necessary comes only through reason, through using its power of self-reflection and self-analysis. So the second thing is, so I'll just say it in a different way, that reason is necessary for the recognition of its own limits. For the recognition of its own. So without reason, we cannot realize uh, uh, that reason is limited. Obviously, only the sound reason or sound reason realizes that there are other reasons which go beyond their limit and they claim, so that's possible as well. But the possibility that reason realizes its own limit is also there. So without reason we can't realize that reason is limited. Reason is not self-sufficient. Reason is only necessary, not self-sufficient. So that's the second thing. And third sense in which reason is necessary follows from the second one. Third sense in which reason is necessary is that once reason realizes its limits, then it is the reason itself which initially and fundamentally shows the way. Not necessarily, because there are always rogue reasons, and we don't want to get into the reasons for that, but fundamentally it's because reason has this power in its nature, which is freedom. So that freedom leads it to cross the limits at times. So when we are talking about these necessity of reasons, so only of when we talk about reason recognizing its limits, for example, so it's not every reason which recognizes its limits, but it has a capacity, and the sound reason does recognize its limits. So the third one is the same. It is the reason itself which initially and fundamentally shows the way. It's absolutely necessary for this purpose, although not all reasons do that. But reason can do that. Sound reason shows the way to other faculties. So, for example, it realizes that it can't on its own give us knowledge of the metaphysical world, but it shows us the way by showing the firstly possibility, and reasonableness. Possibility by showing first the possibility and then reasonableness of revelation. And I'll just come to how it can do that. But so not just that in the second point that necessary to realizing its own limits, but then it also shows the possibility and reasonableness of revelation. And also then once there is a revelation, then it also judges its reliability, whether it is reliable or not, in the sense that a claim to revelation is reasonable or truthful or not. So it is also necessary in that sense that it shows where it realizes its limits. It doesn't just realize its limits, but also then shows the way to other faculties or other possibilities or other sources of knowledge, like revelation, and then judges their veracity in particular cases. So this is the third sense in which reason is necessary. Now I'll just show the general argument for how it shows the possibility and reasonableness. So the possibility, reason show the possibility of various ways it can. So for example, when it analyzes its own process, and its own nature, reflects on it. So it might think something like that there are certain things which are possible, and there are certain things which are necessary as it sees them. And there are certain things which are impossible. Yeah. So these classifications are the result of the self-analysis and self-reflection of reason. Possible in the sense that there's no self-contradiction, there's no contradiction in the fact that this world didn't exist, for example. Or it exists in a different manner, different dimension, for example. So possibility, it's raining, but it's not necessary that it rain or not have rained. And then there are certain things which are necessary. It's necessary that 2 + 2 is 4. That's necessity according to the reason in its own domain anyway. And then there is an impossibility that 2 + 2 is 5. Yeah. And then, so that's the first step. From this distinction, it might argue that the world, it's possible that the world was created by an all-powerful, all-knowing being. It's possible. As far as the reason is concerned, it's not necessary. It's not impossible. So there is a possibility. That's the first step for recognizing the reasonableness of revelation. That's the possibility. Similarly, it's a possibility that this being, all-knowing being, who is only real being in the sense that whose being flows from itself, and every other being is dependent on him. This being, it's possible that this being is merciful, and through its mercy, it's the longing which reason find itself in itself. Reason find longing for truth, not just the ordinary truth, but the highest truth. It's possible that this being reveals to certain people that ultimate truth or part thereof. It's possible. It's not necessary. It's not impossible that it doesn't. So it is possible that the God, it's possible that it reveals the highest truth to certain humans we call messengers and prophets. It's possible. It's not necessary. And then we find certain men and women claiming that they have received that revelation of that truth, ultimate truth, from the creator of this universe. That actually happens, this claim. Now, this claim can be true, can be false, or mixture thereof. But the reason accept the possibility that it is true. It's not necessary, but it is possible that it is true. And then reason also seems to tell us that in order to judge the veracity of this message, we should look at the messenger, their character, whether they are truthful, whether they are of sound mind, and also look at their message, nature of the message, loftiness of the message, internal coherence of the message, etc. And number 3, reason also tell us maybe they have some signs from their God, some miracles of various sort. And in combination, then reason can decide whether this claim is false or reasonably true. Obviously, it can never be sure 100% because that would be against the fact that it is a limited faculty, but it can judge as to the probability and reasonableness of a certain message and messenger, whether it is true and if it is reasonable, then it is reasonable to accept it and know more about it and practice it. And through practice and through knowing the whole system, we can, if it is internally coherent and practically effective, and it is satisfies human this worldly and otherworldly needs, then it is reasonable to suppose that is true, even though we can never be 100% sure, because that world, we don't have access to that beyond, at least not until we die. But it is also reasonable that if other people don't find this reasonable, we should give them that leeway. I think that's very important. So it must not be dogmatic in that sense. If it is dogmatic, that it claims necessity for itself, then it goes beyond what human reason can ever achieve. And revelation, since it has to go through the human reason in terms of understanding, then it is necessary that even the transcendent message or the supernatural message must meet halfway, so to speak, this reason. So here we go then. So that's how I described the three senses in which reason is necessary, and also the argument for how reason, even though it realizes its limits, it also shows us the way towards a faculty which can do what it cannot do. So this is the argument, and I was hoping to go back to the text, but I think I would have to stop here, and we'll pick up the text next time.